crossing to the other side.
Henry Frye grew up in a world where whites and blacks couldn't eat at the same restaurants or stay in the same hotels.
Well, those were the days of separate and equal, or separate and unequal, in fact.
Blacks and whites couldn't drink from the same water fountains. Their children attended separate schools. They couldn't even share a seat on a bus. But Henry Frye helped change the world he was born into in 1932.
He ran for the legislature and was the first African-American elected in the 20th century.
With that election, his being the first black man ever to sit on the state Supreme Court, and his term as Chief Justice, Henry Frye helped bring about change to the old North State.
I was actually born in Ellerbe, but I really grew up on the outskirts of Ellerbe.
The family raised cotton and tobacco along with other crops. The work was hard, but there was always food on the table.
We worked from, as my daddy said, from Cape to Cape, meaning you can't see when you start in the morning, you can't see when you stop at night.
And while young whites and blacks in Richmond County worked in the same fields and tobacco farms together, they were educated separately.
We had two schools in Ellerbe. One was Ellerbe High School, which was white, and Ellerbe Colored High School, which was both elementary and high school. We very seldom got any new books. Most of the books that we got had already been used at the white schools, and there'd be names in there and all that type thing.
Despite the used books and furniture, Frye's education was anything but second-rate. After graduation, he set his sights on college, something only one of his 11 siblings had done. In the fall of 1949, he joined the freshman class at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College in Greensboro. Frye excelled at A&T, particularly in science and math. Active in various student organizations, including the theater, he also met his future wife, E. Shirley Taylor.
I asked this girl to be my date for this party, and she said, well, I'll let you know. And the next day or so, she said, I'll let you know, And then I asked another one, and she said the same thing. I said, the next decent looking girl comes along, that's who I'm going to ask. And who should I see but Shirley?
He graduated summa cum laude in 1953. At the same time, having completed the advanced ROTC program, he received a commission in the U.S. Air Force. Following training in Texas and Colorado, he served the Air Force as a munitions officer in Korea and Japan. He rose to the rank of captain. Before serving in the military, Frye had a low opinion of lawyers and certainly never thought he would become one.
Well, it began to change. I ran into this captain when I was in Korea or Japan, I've forgotten which one now. And in the course of our conversations, he started talking about teaching literacy skills to prisoners, military prisoners. And I said, well, good. I said, how much you get paid for that? He said, pay? He said, I'll do it for free. I said, you a lawyer and you're doing it for free?
Back in North Carolina after his tour of duty, he pondered what to do next. His love of science led him to consider dental school, but he could tell the dental school didn't want to consider him. The UNC Law School, however, showed great interest in the young man. Admitted to law school, Frye had two things he wanted to accomplish before returning to college. He got married to his longtime sweetheart, Shirley, and he decided to register to vote. But this was 1956. Despite graduating summa cum laude from A&T and being accepted to law school, because he was black, he had to prove he was literate.
I went off to the Army, served with great distinction in Japan and Korea. Came back here to North Carolina and went to register to vote and had to take a literacy test, which I think he probably didn't pass because it was almost impossible for an African American to do that at that time.
The purpose of the literacy test was to find a way of frustrating the African American effort to vote.
Thought it would be just a simple thing of going in there and proving that I was a resident of Ellaby. The fellow pulled out a book out from under the desk and started asking questions. And who named a certain number of President of the United States and named certain signers of the Declaration of Independence and things of that nature. And I said, I don't know. And why are you asking me these questions? And he said, it's right here in the book. And I said, I was getting ready to go to law school, so I already started looking up the law, and I knew that what you were supposed to do was to be able to read and write a part of the Constitution of North Carolina to the satisfaction of the registrar. And so I kind of questioned him about it, and he said, well, if you can't answer these questions, you won't pass the test.
On that day, he didn't register. A few weeks later, he met with the chairman of the Board of Elections, who apologized and told Frye to try again. This time, a different person had him copy a segment of the Constitution and then promptly registered him to vote. He graduated from law school in 1959 and began private practice. It was in 1963 that Henry Frye began his string of firsts in North Carolina. U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy named Frye an assistant U.S. District Attorney, the first African American in the state to hold that position. A couple of years later, he returned to private practice and taught classes at the Law School of North Carolina Central. While teaching, he became interested in running for the State House of Representatives. It was his students who paid the $17.50 filing fee.
No black had been elected in North Carolina in 66 years at the time that I first ran in 1966. Some had run, but they always lost. And I thought that some black ought to be able to be elected.
In 1966, Guilford County had 6 at-large representatives. When the votes were counted, Frye came in 7th place. Despite the loss, 2 years later, Frye's name appeared on the ballot again.
I wasn't going to be defeated, so I was going to run again. And in fact, I was encouraged by a lot of people.
This time, the results were different. More African Americans were voting, and even white residents of Greensboro were backing Frye. 68 years after North Carolina effectively barred blacks from voting, the state had its first African American legislator. The first bill he filed dealt with the literacy test.
And you see, this is a part of the North Carolina Constitution. And I just thought that it ought to be changed. And so that was my first bill. It was a bill for a constitutional amendment to abolish the literacy test as a requirement for voting. And most people thought that it was going to be defeated. And in fact, I was wondering if I had a chance myself.
Support for House Bill 327 was stronger in both chambers of the legislature than Frye had expected. Both houses approved the measure. However, a constitutional amendment requires approval of the voters. They did not support it. It was defeated in 1970. With Frye in the House, African Americans found they finally had a way to get the attention of their white legislators.
A lot of them came to me because they figured that I would listen and that I would try to help them. And a lot of them did not know their legislators or felt that their legislators would not be sympathetic to their causes.
In 1971, he became the president of the first black-owned bank in Guilford County. He served a total of 12 years in the State House of Representatives. While in the 1966 election he came in 7th place, now he more often was at or near the top of the list of winners. He was elected to the state Senate in 1980, but after serving one term, he felt he needed to get back into the real world and practice some law. But the break from the world of government service didn't last long. In 1983, he received a call from Governor Jim Hunt offering him an appointment to the state Supreme Court. If he accepted, Frye would once again be breaking new ground. No African American had ever served as a justice.
I think we were going through that period where a lot of people were saying it's time to change. No blacks on the Supreme Court, very few on any court.
Being appointed to the Supreme Court was one thing. Getting elected to retain that seat was another.
And I had opposition in the primary and then opposition in the general election. And I won, not by any great margin, but I won. And then 8 years later, I ran and nobody ran against me.
When the state's Chief Justice Burley Mitchell Jr. announced his retirement in 1999, the stage was set for another first for North Carolina. Once again, Jim Hunt, who was back in the governor's office, tapped Henry Frye as his man for the job.
I didn't have much hesitation about that one. When he called me to go on the court, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. And he told me that he knew I had to talk with Shirley and Henry and Holland. He said, but think about it and call me before breakfast in the morning.
He accepted that night, but once again, having been appointed, Frye would be required to run in the general election.
I appointed him in 1999 when there was a vacancy, and then he had to run for a full term in the year 2000, and he lost.
Frye returned to Greensboro. He became of counsel to the decades-old law firm Brooks Pierce, not only the first of counsel for the prestigious firm, but its first black attorney as well. He is often tapped for charity work and remains very active in the Greensboro community along with his wife, Shirley. They raised 2 sons, one of whom was elected a Superior Court judge here in North Carolina. And now there are grandchildren. He remains active in the Democrat Party and has high hopes for his native state.
I like North Carolina's motto, in the English version, as I understand it, is to be rather than to seem. And so I want to see that become a reality in North Carolina. We're not quite there yet, and I want to keep on working toward that.